How is it possible that in India they sell a new car for $7,000 or less, while in the United States you need almost $18,000 to get into something decent? It's a question that lingers for many every year. Modern myth, an unfulfilled promise of the American dream on wheels. And the thing is, it wasn't always like this. For decades, the United States was synonymous with freedom. Freedom and asphalt. The country where muscle cars were born, convertibles as long as boats, and endless highways. In the 70s, you could buy a new car for the equivalent of about $10,000 today. Those were times when a car was simply that, a car for wheels, an engine, and a destination. But something changed. The average price of a new car in the United States today hovers around $18,000. And if you dare to ask for one with certain basic amenities, air conditioning, a central screen, and maybe decent brakes, you'll be paying more than what a house cost in the United States. In the 80s. So where are the cheap cars? The short answer is they exist, but not here. In countries like India, the legendary Tata Nano was sold at launch for $2,500. In China, the BYD CGOL, a modern electric car, costs less than $11,000. In Mexico, models like the Nissan March or the Chevrolet Aveo can easily be found in the range of $10,000 to $13,000. So why can't you even get close to those prices in the United States? Because here it's not just about the product. It's about the system. The American automotive industry, far from selling cars, builds illusions. Here, they don't sell you a means of transportation, they sell you a narrative. The SUV that makes you feel powerful, the truck that makes you the master of the road, the sedan that reflects your professional success. And in that game of illusions, cheap cars have no place. For example, a few years ago, Chevrolet launched a model called Spar, small, economical, functional, and although it had some acceptance, it never took off. What? Because it was perceived as a poor student car. A loser's car. Harsh words, but true. In the United States, the value of a car is not only measured in horsepower, but in how much it appears you can afford. And that is key to understanding the myth. In other countries, having a cheap car is synonymous with financial intelligence. Here, it is often interpreted as an economic failure, an idea fueled by decades of advertising culture, movies, and the eternal desire to have more than the neighbor. Thus, while the world moves towards accessible, sustainable, and practical vehicles, the United States remains trapped in a paradox. The more you need a cheap car, the more they make it expensive for you. But this is just the surface. Imagine you go to the dealership looking for a simple, functional car without luxuries. Something takes you from point A to point B without emptying your bank account. End up with an SUV, a $38,000 one, 7 years of debt, monthly payments of $650, and insurance that suffocates you. How the heck did that happen? Welcome to the American consumer system, a machinery as precise as it is invisible. Here, it's not about selling cars. It's about selling debt. Credit in the United States is not a supplement. It's the engine of consumption. Almost no one buys a car with cash. Not because they don't want to, but because the system isn't designed for that. It's designed for you to pay interest, insurance, extended warranties, and unnecessary accessories for years. Let me explain. In the year 2010, the most common financing terms were 60 months. Today, the norm is 84 months. That is 7 years paying for something that, in 3, has already lost half of its value. And the finance companies love that because they're not making money from the car, they're making money from your impatience. And this is where the cheap car becomes a problem for them. If there were new vehicles today for $9,000, a lot of people would pay for them in cash or with very short, low-interest loans. That doesn't benefit the banks, the finance companies, or the dealerships because they lose the most lucrative business, which is financing. Let me put it in numbers for you. A $35,000 car financed over 7 years with a moderate interest rate can end up costing you more than $45,000 in total. That's an extra $10,000 that doesn't go to the manufacturer but to the financial system. And that's not all. To that loan, you add the insurance, which in many states is mandatory and very expensive. If you don't have a good credit history, you're penalized with higher rates, large down payments, and special insurance. Ironically, those who can least afford it end up paying more. It's a cycle, but perfect for them, not for you. Now, one might think that if there were more affordable cars, competition would force prices down, right? Yes, but for that, you'd have to allow foreign brands like BYD or Geely to enter the market strongly. And you can imagine who wouldn't agree with that. Cheap cars aren't scarce due to a lack of technology or materials. They're scarce because the system needs you to stay in debt. And it's not a conspiracy. It's statistics. Today, 85% of new cars sold in the United States are financed. That represents hundreds of billions in interest. And no one is willing to kill that goose that lays the golden eggs. Imagine you own one of the big 3 car brands in the United States. General Motors, Ford, or Stellantis have invested billions in factories, technology, marketing, and above all, in consolidating your position as one of the pillars of the national economy. And now, a Chinese brand appears selling an electric car for $10,000. It's not only cheap, it's modern, efficient, and functional. What do? Spoiler, you don't compete, you pressure. The American automotive industry is not just an industry, it's a political force. It has tentacles in Washington, in the unions, in the media, and in regulations. And it's nothing new. Since the 1950s, these companies have influenced government decisions affecting the economy. Which cars get made, how they are sold, and their cost. The standards for emissions, safety, and efficiency. In theory, they are there to protect us. In practice, they are often tools to artificially raise the cost of entry for foreign competitors. For example, in the United States, a regulatory burden is imposed that significantly increases the cost of producing small cars. Things like dual-side airbags, structural reinforcements, specific crash tests, and mandatory monitoring technology that raise the base cost of any vehicle. Are they necessary? Partly, yes, but the end result is that a cheap car, to comply with all those regulations, stops being cheap. Meanwhile, traditional brands take advantage of this to justify higher prices and avoid true competition. And let's not forget the famous case of the chicken tax, a 25% tariff imposed on imported light vehicles, established in the 1960s, supposedly as economic retaliation. Today, it is used, in practice, to protect locally manufactured pickup trucks and SUVs, severely limiting the entry of tall vehicles. Cheaper alternatives, from abroad, yes, market freedom until it affects my sales. But that's not all. Have you ever wondered why the more affordable cars end up disappearing from the catalogs? Models like the Chevrolet Sonic, the Ford Fiesta, or the Toyota Yaris were discontinued in the United States, although they remain available in other countries. Why? Because selling a $40,000 SUV with the same production costs as a $16,000 compact is much more profitable. Same assembly line, but triple the profit margin. And then the dealerships, which also profit. They make more money with expensive cars, stop promoting the economical models, hide them at the back of the lot, or don't even order them for inventory. This creates the illusion that cheap cars no longer exist. But it's an illusion deliberately constructed. Deep down, the industry has learned a lesson. It's better to sell fewer units, but much more expensive ones, to a debt-ridden public that doesn't know how to say no. And if that means shutting the door on more affordable brands or crushing economical models that do work, they will do it. Because this isn't about mobility, it's about market control. Because in the United States, a car isn't bought out of necessity, it's bought to prove something. And that, although it may seem superficial, is one of the deeper reasons why cheap cars have no future in this country. In the United States, the car has always been a symbol of freedom, progress, and status. From the giant Cadillacs that defined the 60s to the black SUVs with tinted windows that today seem like uniforms of silent success. And here lies one of the great tragedies of the automotive market. Cheap cars don't fit into that narrative. If you drive a small, austere car without screens or LED lights, the first thing people assume is that you're going through a tough time. Yes, even if you bought it outright, debt-free, and purely for financial intelligence. Because success in this culture must look expensive. It doesn't matter if you pay $800 a month for something you don't need. As long as they see it, as long as they hear it roar, as long as it shines, then it's worth it. And that's why brands that tried to introduce more affordable vehicles ran headfirst into that cultural wall. Do you remember the Tata Nano? An ultra-cheap car from India, advertised as the cheapest in the world. The project was ambitious. They wanted to bring it to America and break the market, but they made a fatal mistake. They promoted it as a cheap car. And in the United States, that's like wearing a t-shirt that says, "I have no money." It didn't even enter the market. The same thing happened to the Scion IQ, a compact car from Toyota, modern, urban, sleek, and completely ignored. The reason? Too small, too cheap. In a country where even coffee is served extra large, a car less than 3 meters long simply doesn't convey status. Meanwhile, the best-selling cars are not the cheapest ones. They are the giant trucks, the 7-seater SUVs, the redesigned muscle cars with unnecessary V8 engines, vehicles that, in other countries, would be considered extreme luxuries. Here they are the aspirational standard. And that has consequences because that obsession with the car that defines who you are not only influences personal decisions, it also affects which vehicles brands dare to launch. No one wants to produce something that will be perceived as a loser. So brands invest millions in aggressive design, in interiors with huge screens, in paint that looks like it's straight out of a science fiction movie. Also, you feel important behind the wheel, and that obviously drives up the costs. But the big question is, what would happen if suddenly safe, well-designed, and cheap electric vehicles burst into the market? Imagine that tomorrow a shipment of compact electric cars lands at the port of Long Beach, well-equipped, modern, and with a starting price of $10,000. Not used, not rebuilt, not walking spare parts, new. The first to come down is a BYD Seagull, that small electric car that is already a silent revolution in China. Sufficient range, youthful design, central screen, air conditioning, all the basics. But its biggest sin, from the perspective of the American industry, is this. It costs less than what you would pay here for a premium electric scooter. The market's reaction wouldn't be one of celebration, it would be one of panic, because if those cars really reached the American consumer without barriers, without absurd tariff fees or inflated regulations, millions of people would choose to buy them outright, without leasing, without financing, without 7 years of debt. And that would put the entire world in check. The entire system. Financial institutions would lose billions in interest. Manufacturers would see the sales of their most lucrative models plummet. Dealerships would be stuck with inventory of $40,000 cars that no one wants to finance. Even insurance companies would lose out because these cars might cost less to repair or simply not justify such expensive insurance. And let's not forget the most important thing, the consumer would win. For the first time in decades, the average citizen could access a new, modern, and functional car without having to mortgage their future years of life. They could allocate their money to other things, save, travel, invest, start a business. And that, for a system based on constant indebtedness, is an existential threat. So, what is the United States doing in the face of this possibility? What it has always done, close ranks. We are already seeing it. In 2024, the government began to tighten regulations for foreign brands, especially Chinese ones. New security barriers, connectivity regulations, and technical standards are being created that, in theory, protect the consumer, but in practice, close the door. The door to the cheap car. A subtle but constant media narrative is also being promoted. Chinese cars are unsafe. They don't meet our standards. They are a threat to the local industry. All of that may have some truth, but also a lot of commercial strategy disguised as patriotism. Because it's not that these cars can't meet the standards, it's that meeting them would cost so much that they would no longer be cheap. And that, for those already in the game, is the perfect outcome. But I won't tell you. Everything is lost with technological globalization, with the growing pressure from consumers who no longer want to go into debt for a steering wheel, with the explosion of social networks showing economic models from other countries. The myth begins to crack. The question is no longer, why aren't there cheap cars? The question is, how long can we keep justifying their absence? And that is the seed of change. Because even though today it seems impossible to see $10,000 cars on the streets of New York or San Diego, history has taught us that when technology advances and the market gets fed up, no lobby can stop the inevitable forever.